Put your pajamas on, grab a snack, cuddle with a stuffed animal or your favorite human being, and get comfy under those covers. It's story time. Buenas mi gente, or should I say, buenas noches. I am so excited to announce to you all a new exciting mini-series called Orisha of the Week. But before we get into that, I would like to first thank everyone for the engagement and support thus far. As I've tried to emphasize throughout this journey, this is a community, a group effort, a constant dialogue. We're all continuously learning and searching for truth and identity, history, and more specifically, the history of Afro-diasporic musical genres. As always, I truly value your opinions and love hearing your feedback. I also hope you all had the opportunity to listen to episode 5, which was released this past Sunday, featuring our lovely guests, Xiomara Rivas and Jonathan Hill. Honestly, the best part of having a podcast is being able to interview such interesting, diverse people. Literally, the international studies major in me is just like geeking out over that. Anyway, we have come to the end of our salsa series, season 1. And when I say end, I really just mean break, because to be honest, we're probably going to revisit this stuff. I mean, honestly, there's so much more that we have yet to uncover about the history and development and spread of salsa music and dance. But let's, mix it up a little. Now, I'm sure you all are dying to know what's to come. Where shall we travel next? I'm really missing warm weather, by the beach, the sun on your skin, summer vibes. Here in Chicago, it's snowing currently, and it is so cold. Well, buckle up your seatbelts once again, because we are going back to the Caribbean, more specifically, the Greater Antilles, the 4 largest islands in the Caribbean. We've already been to one. Can you guess which one? That's right, Cuba. Season 2 will focus on the other 3 islands. Number 1, Española or Quisqueya in the Taino language, which connects Haiti and the Dominican Republic. 2, Jamaica. 3, Puerto Rico. We will be exploring the history of the music and dance that has been popularized in those specific regions, as well as the African origins of those countries. But as many of you might know, that's gonna be a long list. Now, this is a monthly podcast, so let me tell you right now, we're not going to cover every single genre, because if I were actually going to cover every single genre, we would probably still be in season 2 3 years from now. However, I will promise you that this season 2 is going to be lit, entertaining, informative, well-researched, and I bet you'll be planning a trip to at least one of these places, if not all, throughout this journey. Post-COVID, of course. Stay tuned for more on season 2 later. Okay, I want to show you guys something. Tales of the Orisha by Migene Gonzalez-Wippler. A book that brings to life the fabulous tales of the deities of the Yoruba Pantheon. This book explores the legends, stories, and complex relations of the Orishas of the Afro-Cuban Santeria religion. TBT to episode 2, by the way, Rumba, worshiping the gods of salsa. Consider this a deeper dive into that episode. In honor of the end of our salsa series and the beginning of Black History Month, I present to you all Orisha of the Week. Starting next week, every Thursday at approximately 7 p.m. Central Time, I will publish a video through the Ritmos Negros Instagram and Facebook pages in which I introduce an Orisha and read its associated story and attributes from this very book. So this book actually showcases 16 Orisha that are specific for the Afro-Cuban tradition, which we'll get into later. So we'll have about 16 weeks together. And quick disclaimer, I do not own the rights or any of that related to this book. I am simply reading the information from this book. I don't need anybody knocking on my door. No. Along with posts on the Orisha stories, I will feature Orisha dance specific movements along with the posts. These dance videos will feature Orisha dancers from the community, so you might know some of these people, as well as recommended video sources from people who practice Orisha movements. Today, sadly, we won't cover any Orishas, but we will have an introduction and some refreshers just to make sure that you were paying attention to episode 2 on Aruba. Just a heads up, future episodes won't be as long as this one. And I get it. Watching me read a book might not be the most interesting thing to do, but how can you not love this face? Oh. Anyway, I invite you to truly relax, lay down, close your eyes if you'd like to, breathe. Let's tune in into our bodies and our minds after a long, busy, stressful day. Escape reality for a second as we immerse ourselves in these ancient tales. Take a deep breath in, inhale. Exhale. Namaste. Let's begin. The Yorubas. The Yoruba people of southwestern Nigeria and the neighboring republics of Benin, which is also referred to as Dahomey, and Togos, number more than 10 million. They are subdivided into more than 20 subgroups, each of which traditionally was an autonomous kingdom. In spite of the many differences between the various subgroups, enough cultural links remain to indicate that they all belong to the same ethnic group. This is particularly true of their language, which, according to scholars, has been spoken by Yorubas for several thousand years. The antiquity of the Yorubas is based not only on linguistic evidence, but also on archaeological studies that seem to indicate that the tribes migrated from the east, perhaps from the Upper Nile, in the beginning of the Christian era. It is during this period that we can begin to trace the extraordinary complexity of the economic, political, artistic, and religious aspects of the Yoruba culture, which ranks among the most developed of West Africa. One of the most outstanding characteristics of Yoruba culture was the formation of city-state kingdoms through an unusually sophisticated process of urbanization. The political as well as religious center of their civilization was the holy city named Ife. Also, I just want to say I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any of these names. There are a bunch of characters, a bunch of names in this book, and sometimes it can get a little confusing on who's who, so that's just a heads up. We'll get through it together. All of the various city-states or kingdoms formed a pyramidal socio-political structure, at the apex of which was the city of Ife. The head of Ife was the Oni, which means divine king, from whom all the other Yoruba kings or Obas received the right to wear the beaded crown that symbolized their power. The Oni was said to be a direct descendant from Oduduwa, the founder of Ife, and one of the three deities sent to earth by the creator Oludumare to oversee the destinies of men. Today, the Oni's destiny is still very much in power in Yoruba land, and he still traces his ancestry to Oduduwa. All right, let's backtrack a bit. So we have here a few terms that we want to call to name. We have Ife, which is the holy city. We also have a term called Oni. So Oni means divine king. And next we have the term Oba. Oba is Yoruba king. Then we have the name Oduduwa, which is the founder of Ife. So Oduduwa is the founder of the holy city. And lastly, we have Oludumare, who is seen as the creator of earth, the creator of all. Let's continue. The integral unity of Yoruba culture is directly related to the powerful religious beliefs that throughout the centuries have influenced and permeated their art and socio-political structures. Ife soon became a center of pilgrimage for all Yoruba people who came to consult the priest chiefs who were dedicated to the cults of the principal deities or Orishas. Ife became an oracle city, very much like Delphi in ancient Greece. And indeed, the complexity of the Yoruba Pantheon of gods was not unlike that of Greek mythology. The legends that form the core of this book come to us from these early times and indicate a sophistication of thought very close to that of the Greeks of the 6th century BC. There are definite parallels between the Yoruba deities and those of the Greeks. Like the Olympians, the Yoruba deities were anthropomorphized. That's a big word. And don't feel bad if y'all don't understand it, because I truly did not understand what that word is until I looked it up. So anthropomorphized basically means attributing human qualities, characteristics, feelings, etc. to non-human beings. So giving these Orishas or giving these, the Greek gods, for example, human characteristics. And that's something that we'll further explore as we read. Like the Olympians, they were anthropomorphized and also identified with natural forces. Think about Yamaya, for example, the goddess of water, the goddess of the ocean. So you see the connection between Orishas and natural forces such as water. And we'll see a lot more interesting forces reveal themselves as we learn more about Orishas. They were invoked in times of need and propitiated through sacrifice. The one important difference between the Greek and the Yoruba gods is that while the worship of the Olympians became relegated to books on mythology and ancient history, that of the Orishas or Yoruba gods is still very much alive today, not only in Nigeria, but also in the Western Hemisphere. That's a really good point that I want to highlight, because as we discussed in episode 2, Rumba, we learned that people still practice Santeria, Afro-Cuban tradition, and Yoruba culture still today. In fact, Cuba has a large presence of that. And you'll find out that a lot of other Caribbean or Latino countries also have that as well. The Yoruba religion was and is based on the basic belief that energy, which is referred to as Ache, energy is Ache. So it says that belief that energy, Ache, is the true nature of things. This energy is dynamic and malleable and can be used to alter, why did I say it like that? It can be used to alter for good or for evil, our lives and those of other living things. The prime architect of Ache, which is the substance from which everything came into being, is Oludumare, the supreme creator in Yoruba myth. The Orishas are simply repositories of Oludumare's Ache, which they confer upon mankind by means of suitable ritual sacrifice, which is referred to as Igbo. The concepts of Ache and Igbo are at the root of Yoruba religious thought. Let's backtrack again. So we have the term Ache, which is essentially energy. And you can sort of equate Ache to Oludumare, because Oludumare is sort of this pure, undefined energy, and he is equal to Ache. And we also have this concept called Ebo, which is essentially ritual sacrifice. So there's 3 characters, or 3 groups of characters that I noticed from this little paragraph right here. We have Oludumare, right here. Then we have the Orishas. Then we have humans. So think of Oludumare as sort of this energy source, right? And the Orishas, they're a little like step lower than Oludumare. The Orishas draw energy from Oludumare, and they sort of serve as these beings that hold that energy. So all of these Orishas hold Ache, they hold Oludumare's energy. A step lower, you have humans, those who are essentially performing ritual sacrifices, also known as Igbo, in order to propitiate the Orishas, in order to access Oludumare's Ache energy. So, all material phenomena are explained by the Yoruba through the concept of Ache and the power of the Orishas, identified with natural forces. This idea is closely related with modern scientific views which hold that our world, and indeed all things, are composed of energy in different manifestations. According to modern science, natural forces embodied in physical laws are what hold these energies together. Although Ache is usually received directly from the Orishas through propitiation and invocation, the Yorubas also believe that ritualistic dancing can increase and generate Ache or life force in the individual. I am so happy that they mentioned dancing because, as you know, Ritmos Negros, we ain't nothing if we not dance. Just like Rumba, for example, how rumberos, people who practice Rumba, they literally would access and, perform rituals in order to communicate with the Orishas. So there's a direct connection right there. This generated power is tapped directly from the Orisha to whom the individual dedicates the dance. The power is said to increase particularly during the trance states of possession, when an Orisha is said to take over the conscious personality of a believer. For this reason, many of the rituals of the Yorubas include ceremonial dances in honor of their gods, each of whom has his or her own special chants and drum rhythms. A ceremonial set of sacred drums known as the bata is generally used during these rites. During the slave trade, thousands of Yorubas were brought to the New World. They were not allowed to practice their religion freely. In the United States, where the slave owners were predominantly Protestant, there remain only faint memories of the tradition. I really want to also highlight that point right there. Do you guys remember when I talked about in episode 2 this YouTuber named Black Witch Yaya? And she basically explained the story of Yamaya. And this is obviously like a myth, or it was just like a tale, and there's so many different versions of the story as well. But I thought it was really interesting how she mentioned that essentially during the slave trade, all of the slave ships that came to Africa essentially damaged Yamaya's water. They essentially turned her waters into very dangerous waters. And when the colonists came over and basically enslaved Africans, they brought along Yamaya and the religion. But what had happened was that during that voyage, or when Africans arrived in different New World territories, some of those people lost their connection to the Yoruban religion and culture. So they lost their way to Yamaya, since she was sort of the source to the Yoruban and African connection to that religion. I just thought that was super interesting because it sort of just explains or connects to how, like, the United States, for example, doesn't have a huge Yoruba culture, or doesn't have that sort of syncretic religion with Yoruban culture as you see in a lot of Caribbean countries. And as you'll know, the book says, Cuba, Brazil, and Haiti, however, were Catholic countries, and the Yorubas could more readily disguise their deities behind the visages of the Catholic saints. In Cuba, the Yoruba beliefs gave birth to a mixture of Catholic and Yoruba practices which became known as Santeria, that is, the worship of saints. This was the result of the identification of some of the Orishas with Catholic saints. A similar syncretism caused the birth of the Shango cult in Trinidad, and Candomblé and Macumba in Brazil. In Haiti, only a few of the Orishas became popular. This is really interesting, especially Ogun, the god of iron. But because other tribes were involved in the Haitian syncretic mixture, the resulting religion known as Voodoo or Vodun reflects only traces of Yoruba beliefs, In Haiti, the African gods and spirits became known as loas, not orishas. I'm pretty sure many of you know what voodoo is or have heard of voodoo. And something that I didn't really know a lot about was that connection to orishas. I had no idea that voodoo even really celebrated orishas or like some form of, well, not orishas, but loas. I actually took this Afro-Haitian dance class through this company called Kumbe, the Center for African Diasporic Dance. And it's actually based in New York, but they have virtual classes now, so I was able to take one. And it was an amazing class. I learned a lot of different movement. It's very, to me, it looked very similar to Orisha Afro-Cuban movement. That could just be my ignorance. But I just thought it was super interesting because the concept of loas, and even just the naming of that and being distinct from Orisha culture because of the Orisha gods, because of the fact that in Haiti, there wasn't a huge presence of Yoruba beliefs. There were other African beliefs that influenced voodoo or Haitian religion. In the Americas, the cult of the Orishas, known collectively as the Orisha tradition, is said to be practiced by more than 100 million people, most of whom are concentrated in Brazil. In the United States, the number of worshippers is more than 5 million. These are mostly Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Colombians, Venezuelans, and others of Latin American extraction. But the numbers of both Black and white practitioners is on the increase. The entire religious edifice of the Yorubas is based on the myths or patakis. So patakis means myths, they're synonymous terms, that explain the creation of the world and of mankind, the interactions between man and nature, between man and the Orishas, and among the Orishas themselves. The resulting philosophy reflects a rich understanding of the human condition and contains deep spiritual insights. The cosmology. Although in Nigeria, the Yorubas worship over 600 Orishas, in the New World, their numbers have dwindled to a little over 20. The diminishing numbers of Orishas do not indicate a lessening in their worship. On the contrary, more people believe in the Orisha's power in the Western Hemisphere than in Yoruba land itself. And remember, Yoruba land is sort of the birthplace of all of this in Nigeria. The reason why fewer Orishas are worshipped in the New World is that in Nigeria, nearly every village or town worships its own personal Orisha. Imagine 600 towns or 600 Orishas being separated in distinct cities or towns. For example, Obatala was originally from the holy city of Ife. Chango was from Ogo. Ogun from Ife, but this Ife is spelled without an accent. Oshun from Oshogbo. Elegua or Eshu from Ketu. And Yamaya from Abeokuta. During the slave trade, only some of the Yoruba villages were raided and their inhabitants brought to the Americas. The Orishas they worship became part of the Orisha tradition in the New World. When the various Yoruba families intermingled during exile, people began to worship various Orishas. In some instances, as with the Orisha Ochosi, the divine hunter, an entire village with its corresponding Orisha was brought over to the Americas. This ended the worship of that particular Orisha in Nigeria, where no one remained who was familiar with his mysteries and his rites. But in Cuba and Brazil, the cult of Ochosi is very powerful. So let's break this down actually a little bit further. I found this extremely intriguing. And let's take the example of Ochosi and Cuba specifically. So what this is saying that, for example, when looking at Cuba and looking at the different Afro-Cuban Orishas that are associated with that specific country, essentially this book is saying that the reason why there are not that many Orishas celebrated in the New World is because those specific cities or towns within Nigeria were raided. And the Orisha that was associated with that city or town essentially was brought over to the New World with those corresponding slaves. In the case of Ochosi, because the entire village was raided and brought over, it is no longer celebrated in Nigeria and instead only celebrated in Brazil and Cuba. That is mind-blowing. Wow. The tales narrated in this book are a compilation of some of the legends of the Orishas and the Cuban tradition of Santeria. Most of them can be traced to Yoruba sources, but some are of purely Cuban origins. There seems to have been fusion not only of the Yoruba myths with the Spanish and Christian beliefs, but also with the legends of other African groups in the New World. This resulted in a new group of tales recounting the creation of the world and the Orisha. The tales presented in this book have been arranged so as to unfold Yoruba creation stories and the lives and adventures of the Orishas, emphasizing their intensely human qualities, anthropomorph something, I forgot the word, and the interrelationships among themselves. So, before we go into the final section of today, I want to emphasize a few characters that we discovered. Oludumare. So think of Oludumare as essentially God, the creation and force of the universe. Number 2, we have Olorun Olofi, who is essentially man's personal God. And Olofi is also considered one of those 3 deities that were essentially put in charge of the creation of the earth. Remember when we read the Aruba chapter? On to the next. Creation of the world. In the beginning, there was only Oludumare, pure, undefined energy, a being without beginning or end. Oludumare's essence can never be comprehended by mortal man because his substance is beyond human ken. What Oludumare is can best be understood by the Yoruba concept of Ache, which we discussed, energy, divine power. Ache is the stuff of the universe, the primordial atom, the breath of life. It is also intelligence, movement, creativity, the impulse of being. In short, Ache is Oludumare. This undefined and undefinable entity is composed of 3 separate and equally undefinable spirits known as Oludumare Nansame, Olofi, and Baba Nkwa. Oludumare is the creative principle of this unknowable trinity. So Oludumare is sort of like the brand face of the trinity. I don't know why I said that. See what business school is doing to me? To give expression to his creativity, he brought heaven and earth into being and formed the sun, the moon, the stars, and all plant and animal life on this planet. When he finished his work, he asked Olofi and Baba Nkwa what they thought of his creation. Both of his companions agreed that Oludumare Nanzame had created great and marvelous things, but pointed out the need for an intelligent being to rule over the earth. At their suggestion, Oludumare Nanzame made from mud the first man. He created the man in his own image, giving him intelligence, beauty, and immortality. He named his creation Omo Oba. Remember, Oba is Yoruban king. That's what it translates to. Very soon, Omo Oba became so conceited and so proud of his great beauty and supernatural powers that he became convinced that he was equal to Oludumare. His arrogance grew to such proportions that Oludumare, enraged at Omo Oba's insolence, ordered Natsalam, and Natsalam is the lightning bolt, ordered Natsalam, the lightning bolt, to destroy Omo and all life upon the earth. Unfortunately, Oludumare had forgotten that he had created Omo Oba immortal, so he can't die. And therefore, Natsalam could not destroy him. Lightning bolt after lightning bolt fell upon the earth, and Salam in pursuit of Omo Oba. But while Omo Oba was left unscathed by the scorch of heaven, all other life on the planet was destroyed. Gone were the forests and the rivers. The seas were dried in rivulets of lava, and all animal life lay in a gigantic, streaming grave. The entire earth had become a lifeless desert. In the meantime, Omo Oba had hid himself in the bowels of the earth, where he is still surrounded by the fire and brimstone caused by Nasalam's scourge. He changed his name to Olosi, and comes periodically to the surface of the earth to incite men to break Oludumare's laws. So based on that, I could sort of infer that he probably is in the underworld. Soon after these unhappy events, Oludumare felt sad at the devastation caused by Nansalam, and decided to remedy the situation. All three spirits that formed the deity descended upon the earth and mercifully covered it with new life. They created a new man to rule over the earth, but did not give him the gift of immortality. They named this new being Obatala. After this second creation, Olofi was put in charge of the earth's affairs, and the other two spirits, Oludumare Nansame and Mbamanakwa, left the planet to continue their work of creation elsewhere in the universe. Olofi is therefore the aspect of Oludumare that's conceived of as man's personal god. And that's all for tonight, folks. Take care, have a good night, and please join me next time on this journey as we unveil the secrets of the first created OG Orisha, Obatala. Ciao, ciao for now.